Good morning. This is John Shaw, the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. Thank you for joining another edition of our series, Meet the Mayor, in which we have visits with interesting mayors in our state in Illinois. So thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're privileged to be joined by Mayor Mike Absher of Marion, just down the road from Carbondale. The mayor is a lifetime resident of Marion, had an auto firm there that we'll talk about, was president of the school board for a number of years, and then became mayor of Marion last year. So 2019, he was elected. So Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate the invitation. I'm glad to be included in an interesting group.
Okay, great. Well, Mr. Mayor, as I looked at your website, the City of Marion's website, they have this wonderful vision of the city at night, the town square lit up, sort of like your background now. And then it has the claim, hub of the universe. What is the history behind that somewhat expansive claim?
Yeah, I don't know when exactly that phrase was coined. My understanding is I think that was lifted from Boston's moniker or their term. But my predecessor, Mayor Butler, I think probably did that somewhat tongue in cheek at first. And then I guess it, like lots of things that come out of your mouth, sometimes they stick, and that one stuck. I don't particularly like it, to be honest with you. I've always thought it was a little bit reeked of some hubris, in my opinion, and so I'm trying. Matter of fact, my phrase is we call Marion the oasis of opportunity, and so I hope that over time that phrase sticks a little bit more, maybe a little bit not. Maybe that one still is a little bit braggadocio, I don't know, but at least it's more aspiring and hoping that we can lure people here and have opportunity as opposed to just stating you're a hub of the universe.
Well, tell us about your I know I mentioned that you're a lifetime resident of Marion. Were your folks from Marion? Tell us a little bit about your growing up, and also give us kind of a thumbnail sketch of your community, both as you were growing up and what it looks like now.
Okay. Yes, I am a lifetime resident of Marion, except for a very short time in the service during my college years. Grew up here, graduated from Marion Public Schools. My mother was a public school teacher, and when I was in my primary years, she then exited teaching and had her own business before she joined my father in the car business. But my grandfather and grandmother actually started selling cars, used cars in Marion, actually before World War II. He was a school teacher and did that sort of on the side, and then did that for a couple years after the war was over. And then hung up his teaching credentials and just decided to do that full time starting in 1947. So basically my family's been in the car business for a long time here in town. And my brother still owns and runs that lineage of the business. I left the business in 2002 and started a software company, and did that for a handful of years. And then I retired for about 3 hours after I sold that company, and then decided that I wanted to get back in the car business. And that's when I bought my wife Cheryl and I bought Marion Ford in Marion. And then we've acquired other dealerships since then. That's sort of evolved over time into what's we now call the Watermark Auto Group. So we've got two new car dealerships in Illinois, a used car dealership, little one over in Harrisburg, and then we've got 4 new car dealerships in Kentucky, actually. So about 13 new car franchises and about 300 employees that are part of Watermark. And so anyway, that's that story. And then, as you alluded, it's on the school board, loved that, missed that greatly. But didn't think I should continue to do that forever. And this opportunity opened up. You talk about growing up in Marion and this specific job that I've got. Mayor Butler was first elected mayor 7 years before I was born, and I'm 50. So, I didn't know anything different, as most of my contemporaries didn't know anything different than a Mayor Butler for Marion, Illinois. So it's been an interesting thing to transition from not knowing anything different as a citizen to now sitting in the same chair that he sat in for so long. So,
well, where did you go to college, and tell us about the school board years in terms of just the challenges. What was it about being president of the school board that was so enticing and interesting?
What was your first question before the school?
Where did you go to school?
Oh, okay. I went to SIU Carbondale, got a degree in business.
That wasn't a setup question, by the way.
Oh, okay. No, I'm a graduate of SIU. My brother is a graduate of SIUC. My father is a graduate of SIUC. My wife's a graduate of SIUC Law School. So we're very much plugged in, I guess you should say, and very interested to see SIU succeed, not just as our alma mater, but for our region. It's an absolute economic engine for Southern Illinois, and I think a lot of people have maybe discounted that for a little while, and that's a shame, and don't need to. But anyway, I love Carbondale and love SIU. School board you asked about, so I'll tell you how that one happened. So at the time, this was about 2010, and I don't want to make any disparaging remarks. I'm not making any disparaging remarks about the leadership that we had at that time, but it's a fact that we had some substantial financial problems in the school district at that time. And our school district had really, for many years, had a surplus and had quite a lot of money, maybe even too much. If that's a ridiculous sounding statement to make at this point in this world, but there was some valid criticism that maybe they were maybe having too much money at one time. And then that changed over a number of years, and it was pretty well known that the school district was having some financial problems. And just to be blunt about it, I was complaining about it to my wife over and over, and she finally looked at me and said, "Absher, you have completely the skill set and the capability to raise your hand and offer to help fix this. So either do that or quit complaining about it. I'm tired of hearing it." So I said, okay. And I did, and was elected. And 2 years after I was elected, that my peers elected me as president of the school board. And I served for 6 years as president, 8 years total. And, despite what lots of people and their perceptions of public service, particularly that kind of job. I can't tell you how many times somebody said, "Boy, you've got a thankless job," and this kind of thing. But man, I found it to be one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I wouldn't trade $1 million for that experience. Now, $2 million, we can talk. But no, I'm kidding. I really found that to be an enriching set of years and experiences. And even though I grew up and went to that school system, like I said, my mother was a teacher in that school system. Matter of fact, she was president of the school union when I was a kid. And despite that, boy, you get a completely new perspective on things, and really just how incredibly important public education is to our society as a whole. Just really where it can be successful, the pinch points where it can fail. And what I mean by that is, just to give you a simple example that I think everybody can relate to, first grade is just such an extraordinarily important time in public education, because that's when kids primarily learn to read. And if you miss that window, students don't succeed after that point. If you can't read, you can't succeed. And, I should have known that before. I think I would have said, "Oh yeah, I can understand that before," but I understand it, at least at one time, like the back of my hand, and understand just how critical public school is to really everything we want to do as a society. And so I loved it. I loved every minute of it. We got to innovate and bring some flipped classroom type environments and change some things there. We introduced Chromebooks into the school system at a time when nobody thought we could even afford a case for a Chromebook. and we succeeded. And I believe now every student, it's not all Chromebooks, but every student from 12th grade all the way to kindergarten has got access to some sort of device to enhance their learning. So it was kind of a different way of using entrepreneurship skills in a different environment, which segues actually to what my motive was to running for my current office. To me, it's kind of an experiment to see if I'm right that entrepreneurship can exist in a governmental setting. And so I hope over time I'm able to prove that to my constituents, and I'm loving every minute of it and feel so blessed to have this job, and I'm just excited every day to be here. I really mean that. That's not just a spiel. I really, even after all these years of being in the workforce, this is my most fulfilling position that I've ever had, and I just love it.
Well, let's talk for a second about the legacy of Mayor Butler. I mean, you made a reference to him, and when he passed, I noticed, I saw an article in the Southern where you were quoted as saying, "You always knew where you stood with Bob, and that is always refreshing, even if you were on the wrong side of something. He was very straightforward and could be very, very forceful and very persistent. One-on-one, he was a gentleman. That's what I will miss most." Tell us about Mayor Butler and his legacy.
Well, I'm not 100% sure that was my quote, but I agree. Even if it wasn't, I agree with that wholeheartedly. His signature is on almost everything at this point in Marion, but that statement, whomever gave it, is absolutely right on. Matter of fact, I remember a quote that he was quoted at one time, and this goes back to his initial either election or re-election, which would have either been 1963 or 1967, I suppose. But his quote, which I watched him live this, was that the people deserve a yes or no. If it's a yes or no question, people deserve a yes or no answer. And not that he wouldn't think about it, contemplate it, but he would absolutely give you a yes or no answer. So you absolutely did know where you stood with him. And I think that, among many other things, is one of the reasons, even if you disagreed with him and whatever that decision might be, I think people respected that. I don't know that exists, that old school yes or no type environment exists in too many governments. I think people at least perceive that all you're going to do is get red tape. One of the things that I respected the most and still try to do to this day. Matter of fact, I unplugged my phone here next to me because even when I put it on Do Not Disturb, it still rings in, so I must not know how to use it. But there's a direct line into the mayor's office. It's published. It's on the website. And when it rings, if I'm in here, I answer it. And he did that. If you called, matter of fact, 9 times out of 10, when I answer the phone and said, "This is Mike," and they say, "I want to speak to the mayor," and I say, "You're speaking to him," and it just shocks people. And it shocked people when Mayor Butler answered the phone. But that instant access to government officials or government in of itself, I think that's lacking in lots of organizations. And I think it's a point of pride for Marion that you've got access to that. And really just following suit with that example that he set. So whether it was answering the phone or whether it was being out and about when his health was allowed that to happen, he was just a very accessible, very approachable person. And you could count on him giving you an answer, even if that wasn't exactly what you wanted to hear. You weren't going to hear the government speak in the two sides of your face type thing. He was he was who he was, and very strong personality, and that came across in a multitude of ways, but you always knew exactly where you stood. And I think that from just a broader sense, I think that extended to Marion's demeanor, whether that was a demeanor towards business recruitment or improvements in the town or whatever. You set a course, you stick to it, you adjust when necessary, but you don't blow with the wind and change at every weather change. You stick to it. And boy, was he an expert at stick-to-itiveness.
Well, so why he stepped down in 2018, and then there was a race for mayor in 2019. Why did you decide to run? What was your agenda? And tell us about your first year or so on the job.
Well, I chose to run principally because of what I said previously. I really feel like I helped introduce some entrepreneurial growth measures in our school system. I'm proud of some of those things, very proud of some of those things. One of those being, like I said, the Chromebook initiative. I sort of proved to myself that a skill set to grow an organization, and to me, leadership is showing people what to do, not telling them what to do, and having that kind of demeanor. I felt like that was a success in the school system. I did not think I wanted to do that forever. It's always good to have fresh blood and think new ideas and that kind of thing. And I felt like I had served we did fix the financial problems, and then we grew. And so I felt like I fulfilled what I ran for. But at that point, I was so encouraged by how I felt in being a public servant, even though that's not a very visible one in any way, but it just felt so right to me. Like I was doing something that was truly worthwhile. I had spent a career feeding my own family, building up my own business, and it just felt really good to help other people and our town as a whole. So I hadn't really convinced myself whether I was going to run or not, but I think when Bob stepped down, it was obvious he was not going to run again after all those years. I just felt like that my school board term ends, that election is the same as the mayoral election. It's always in the spring of the odd year following the gubernatorial election in Illinois. So it coincided. My term was ending when that one began. It made sense to me. And so I decided to go for it and became very passionate about the issues. And those issues were really only 2 or 3 things, but one of them was I wanted to see the mall re-envisioned, and we really had to engage in that morass and that problem and find a way through it, find new blood, new investment, and new ideas in order to turn that thing around. The city, over the last 30 years, on different portions of the infrastructure and stuff, the city of Marion had invested about $20 million into that investment. So that was taxpayer money. So I felt like the taxpayer deserved a say in what happened on that property next. And we needed to engage, not ignore it. And I felt like it had been ignored. So that was one of my motives. The second one is to clean up some of the older sections of town. Or my family's business, and even my mom taught school was just a block or 2 down the street here at Washington Grade School from City Hall, and grew up in this corner of town, literally. And as lots of old small towns that get older, the parts that are where the town starts, it just degrades over time. It dilapidates, and it's a constant battle to reinvest in those areas. And so that was... And incidentally, that's where all of our potential affordable housing is in Marion, is in some of these older towns. Not everybody, or some older part of town, not everybody needs or wants to rent an apartment. And the truth is, for what some of the apartments go for in town, for half that price, you can have a great house. But people aren't looking in some of these older neighborhoods where those affordable houses are, because we haven't kept up with the infrastructure, the streets, the sidewalks, the drainage, the trimming of the trees, the sprucing up here and there, cleaning up trash, just kind of boring things, but really necessary things in order to keep old neighborhoods vibrant and attractive. And I've always believed that, and this has held true, incidentally, since I've become mayor, that the people have this concept, by the way, that employers that are seeking to locate, that Illinois just has everything going wrong for it. And we've got some challenges, there's no question, but that nobody considers anything because of workman's comp or because of this, that, or the other. When I get calls from potential employers, they want to know about the workforce. They want to know how they're trained. They want to know whether they're available, whether they're motivated. They want to know that if they need to grow that workforce, is there affordable living here, housing for them here? Is there schools to educate those kids? They want those employees to live and engage in those communities. So this whole thing about fixing up our older neighborhoods really is, it's not altruistic from the sense from the sense that we need to have nice neighborhoods. It truly gears up with an economic recruitment program, if you will. If you need those, for example, if we got another chance, our biggest employer here is Ison. They've got 2,200-ish employees. They all, of course, do not come from Marion. Matter of fact, I think there's about 83 zip codes that are represented there in their workforce, but a lot of them are from Marion. But let's just say we had the opportunity to land another Ison. It would be a huge opportunity. We don't have housing for another Ison. And the people that are making $15 or $18 or $20 an hour, benefits or not, they can't afford a $300,000 house in Kokopelli or at the Lake of Egypt. They need a $80,000, $100,000 house, you know. And so I just felt like that was a critical point to clean up some of these neighborhoods, because you talk about bringing jobs, you talk about recruiting new companies and all this stuff, but you really have to go more granular than that and go, does our housing support that? Does our workforce training support that? Does our public school system support that? Can we handle that kind of infusion of growth? So that's the kind of thing I wanted to work on. We are working on that. And then other than just the neighborhood, the town as a whole, in my opinion, the way it looked unkept, a little bit dirty, depending on where you're at. And my analogy to that was, particularly while I was knocking on doors during the campaign, we look like almost two different Marions. At 70 miles an hour on that overpass on the interstate, everything's shiny and new, and it looks like it's a great big bustling town. But at 1 mile an hour, when you're walking, knocking on doors in some of the older neighborhoods and stepping over things that shouldn't be in the street or ditches that aren't maintained or whatever that we can do a better job with, it's just a completely different view. And so what I always talked about during the campaign and continue to is that we have to become accustomed to putting our visitor glasses on when we're traveling through our own town, whether that's at 1 mile an hour walking or 70 miles an hour driving. If you want to grow your economy, you want to grow your town, you have to look at it as what others see when they come in for a first impression. And so just in a general sense, that was the third plank, is that we have to look at ourselves with visitor glasses on. And then we have to engineer what we want to be. And it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of money to get there. But those were the three main reasons that I ran and continue to work on those things today. And I'm still fired up about all three of them and making sure that they're successful.
Well, on your website, you have a Vision 2020 agenda, which has, the economic or the citywide revitalization is key. Another one, you talk about economic development tools, and maybe we don't want to get too caught up in the weeds of municipal finance, but you make a lot of references in both this plan and in other financial documents to tax increment financing, TIFs, mm-hmm. And you have a number of them in the city. I guess some of them are expiring, most of them, and then there's a renewal process. Tell us, and then also in one of your meetings, I heard some discussion of enterprise zones. Talk about those two vehicles to help do some of the economic growth initiatives that you're interested in.
Sure. Well, as you alluded to, Marion has I saw a white paper on this that referred to it as TIF density. And basically the number of square miles that you have in TIF districts versus your population count. Marion has always been very aggressive with TIF districts. And I'm neither the strongest proponent for them nor the strongest detractor. I'm a middle of the road guy politically, and on most issues, I try to see both sides of it. So TIF can be very, very useful. It can be detrimental, in my opinion, if it's not used judiciously and very carefully. You are talking about tax dollars, and that's always subjective on how those tax dollars were used. But getting past that a little bit and that whole argument, the reality is going back to Mayor Butler, I think our first TIF district, TIF 1, was started in 1987. Those have a 23-year statutory life, and as you alluded to, have a 12-year extension possibility if the Illinois legislature approves as such. That particular one was extended, so its 35-year total life is ending in just 2 tax years. That is by far, that's where almost all the growth from a TIF standpoint in a boundary, that's where that's happened. That all the stuff out by the interstate, that's all that original TIF. So the downside, if you will, to being an early adopter of some of those tools is we're the first to expire. So as other towns that have got on that bandwagon, the oddity of that is they will now have some economic development tools that we will no longer be able to deploy. And that was really what I was speaking to in some of those arguments that I made to the council in that Vision 2020 proposal, is just looking out a little bit and going, basically the thing that we have banked on and used to propel so much of this, it's ending, and it's not evergreen. It's not going to get renewed. It shouldn't be renewed, in my opinion. It's served its purpose. What's next? We have to plan on what is next. So I had asked the council to actually set back some dollars that was tied to the bigger plank of that Vision 2020 proposal, which was somewhat controversial. And boy, did I get my fill of small town politics with that one. But I proposed that we increase our sales tax and do away completely with our city property tax. I felt like in our specific situation, based on my research, somewhere in the neighborhood, I'm safe at saying this number, about 65% of the sales tax dollars that are generated in Marion who's paying those are not Marion residents. So if you can pay for your city services with other people's dollars, to be blunt with it, that's sort of the holy grail, so to speak, from a taxation standpoint, in my opinion. And so why would you want to tax your own property? Again, good arguments. Illinois as a whole's got over-reliance on property tax to fund different services. And so I felt like we were relieving some of that by doing it. But as part of that all of that move with the different taxation mechanisms, I asked them to set aside some dollars for economic incentives, not knowing what those might be, as basically an inadequate perhaps, but at least an attempt to have a substitute for TIF, as we want to, of course, still grow after some of these TIF districts expire. So that's kind of what that was about. And then I can't remember what your other question was in there. If there was
enterprise zones too.
Enterprise zones. So enterprise zones are a county-wide thing. So Williamson County just expired is expiring, I'm sorry, at the end of this year, but we just got approved for a new one. That was a 10-year plan. This new one is only a 5-year enterprise zone, and it's a different mechanism of TIF altogether. There's a very common misconception, by the way, go back to TIF for just a second, that people that are in TIF districts don't pay property taxes, and that is just absolutely not the case. They pay dollar for dollar every dollar that they would pay otherwise. It's just a matter of the city is capturing that revenue that's extra, that's incremental, the I of TIF. And in some cases, if they have a project that qualifies, they can get a percentage of the property taxes they pay back. Sometimes that's 60 cents on the dollar, but people get real bent out of shape on TIF because they say, well, so-and-so, he got to build an apartment or whatever, a house, and he gets 60, which is not usually the case anyway. He gets 60 cents, or he didn't have to pay property taxes. Well, the reality is he's paying $1 to get 60 cents back. That's not a very good investment. It helps offset that, but it's a terrible investment on itself. Enterprise zones is an entirely different mechanism altogether. That's where all the taxing bodies come together and basically abate property taxes. No one's capturing it. They abate it. In our case, we're going to do a 5-year deal, if I'm recalling this right. The first year is 100%, and it scales down 20% each year until the fifth year is only 20%. So if you average that, basically for 5 years, you're only paying 50% of the property taxes that you would. But nobody's capturing that dollars. The state's actually abating that. All the taxing bodies are abating that in tandem. So, but that even needs to be even more judicious. And typically the towns that ask for different areas of their towns to be included in that, those are the problematic areas, or the areas that they just haven't been able to develop otherwise and are looking for some other tool. I introduced last fall into the old enterprise zone, and then that will transfer over to this one. One of the unique things that Marion asked for, and I don't understand why other communities aren't doing this more. No one else seemed to be very interested, but for the first time, we included a dilapidated residential area in an enterprise zone. hoping that as we can plan that area differently, and maybe as homes become available and other people buy them, that becomes yet another reason for them to reinvest in that area. So that's another way, unique way that, excuse me, I knew that thing would go up. The unique way that Marion is asked to treat enterprise zones. Thus far, it hasn't been very successful. I haven't got any takers, but we'll just have to see.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. I mean, COVID obviously has been wreaking havoc on the country, the world, the state over the last 6-7 months. How has COVID affected Marion? How has it affected your community so far? And what concerns do you have as we go forward with this talk of a fall spike as to how it's going to affect your schools and businesses?
Well, I guess my first comment is no one's unique in that situation. It's obvious to me, I read on the news, Europe's having a surge, or whatever you want to call it, spike, surge, or just the natural progress of this thing. I, like everybody else, sure wish I knew what the end game to this thing was, whether that's a vaccine or what. And I don't mean this statement as being pessimistic. I just think it's realistic. From my standpoint, it seems like the end game is ultimately we all end up getting this. Not that anybody wants to rush out and have that, but as far as concerns, people, in my opinion, need to be very diligent about masks. And it's like everything else in our country that has some reason ended up being, with some people, the absolute flashpoint issue on some things. And I think that's sad. I also understand why people get upset about it, because all the direction and the advice that we've gotten over time has changed. But I think we also have to realize that, of course, it's going to change. We're learning as we go with all this. Of course, your advice that you're going to get from the health authorities has changed. But, and what I'm talking about is, at first, you had to have this N95 mask, but don't go buy those because the medical community needs them. And now, basically, if you cover your face with your shirt, apparently that's okay. So I don't know. I get frustrated with some of that, like a lot of others. But I think what my concern is right now is just COVID fatigue. And I don't mean that in the clinical sense. I mean, my observation is people are getting so tired of the rules, and, and my fear is, or my concern is, this obviously is going to go on longer than what we had hoped. And it's going to take more diligence, and it's just going to take more vigilance to either get to the point where a vaccine or therapeutics are widely available. And I feel like people are tiring out on that and just getting, there's the potential of just getting lax with it. And this is the wrong time of the year to do that, of any time of the year. We're obviously going to be more indoors than out at this point, and I think that's helped with the spread, or so they say it has. So I worry about that. And I said this early on. I think I even said this in a speech I gave on YouTube in April, when I pleaded for people to wear masks. Is that my biggest fear is we just come unglued as a community, as a county, as a state, or whatever. We need to quit fighting about it, and we just need to hunker down and do the things that's necessary to defeat this. And particularly so, we've got to be very careful with those that are clinically at risk and those that are elderly. I mean, I think if there's any mistake that we made really worldwide, based on my opinion, I don't think we put enough emphasis on that piece from the beginning, and I think that's come back to really bite us. Not sure what we could have done exactly differently, or that the outcome would have been different. But the longer this goes, which it's obviously going to at this point, I think just a realist, we got several more months of this to deal with. And I just think people are getting tired of the rules and being preached at, and the constant negativity. No matter what you watch or read, it's constant negative stuff. And I'm afraid that people become numb to it and just stop doing the things that honestly are going to be necessary to do to get past all of this. So that's really what my fear is. As far as Marion financially, we've done very, very well during all of this. I said this during the council meeting Monday night, we're 6 months into the fiscal year. At this point, we are $100,000 shy of what our projections were on sales tax revenue, which again is our revenue source. It's not property tax anymore. I honestly thought for the year we'd be down 4 or 5 million when this thing started. So, man, I'm just elated when it comes to that. I mean, we don't have anything to worry about on the sales tax front. Our bigger financial pressures are going to be from our Marion's unique in that we've got very large public venues such as the Hub Recreation Center, the Civic, Marion Cultural and Civic Center, and the Pavilion, all of which are very large public facing constituent revenue, ticket revenue type of thing. And obviously the Hub has a limited business model, but the Civic Center and the Pavilion have basically no business model. So we're going to actually have more loss or more financial pressure from the loss of revenues from those facilities than we are, as it turns out, for sales tax revenue in of itself. But all in all, Marion is in a very good position financially, and I give lots of kudos to both my predecessors, Bob Butler and Anthony Ranella, and their respective city councils. They set back money for reserves just for instances like this. We have not had to tap into those reserves, and I really can't complain on that. But I do hope our citizens are in for the COVID. To defeat COVID, we've got to be in it for the long haul and just understand what it's going to take to defeat those things and live with the downside. It looks like we may be on the cusp regionally of some more mitigation measures. That's not going to be very popular. But I just think we're going to have to do those things. We just have to in order to get by, or it's just going to last that much longer, frankly. So,
more broadly, in terms of the job of mayor of Marion, what is the best part of it? What's the most difficult and frustrating?
Oh, gosh. First of all, my list of bests would be a whole lot longer than the list of worst. But if I had to pick one, it sounds so hokey to say this, but I just love my hometown. It took me the better part of 50 years of trying to escape in one way or the other to realize it's actually a pretty doggone nice place to live. And I just love this role. I love being able to serve. I love being able to envision. I love being able to enact those visions and see some neat things happening already in town. I've loved being a part of the solution for the mall. That was a really hairy jigsaw puzzle to work through, but man, like any jigsaw puzzle, when you put those final pieces in it, it's a nice feeling. So I love that stuff. It's exhilarating to me. It's just what fires me up. What fuels me. The worst part is we talked about this offline before we had this incident a couple weeks ago surrounding some chickens in town. And so the juxtaposition of issues, talking about answering the phone, I might get a call from somebody wanting to lease 50,000 square feet at the mall one second, and the very next phone call is about pigs that we've got on another street. It's just sometimes it's hard to shift gears and deal with that. I guess the worst part, or the piece that I don't like the most, which is intrinsic to any position like this, is you simply cannot make everybody happy. And talking about those chickens thing, I mean, either we have a rule that you don't have chickens or you don't. And I'm fine whether the council wants to pass either one. But if it says I have to enforce it, then I think that rule should apply to everybody. And the problem comes is starting to make exceptions for this situation, that situation. It just becomes very untenable to govern that way. And that's a challenge. And that's never going to change, but that's probably the piece that I don't look forward to the most each day, is trying to explain to people that I know you love your chickens and you have them named, but well, my neighbors like my chickens. They don't mind me having chickens. I understand that, but a neighbor a year from now might, and your neighbors collectively have decided that we don't want chickens inside city limits, or pigs or goats or whatever. So I don't like letting people down, and that's just part of this job. And, I'm sure that's easy to understand. You can't make everybody happy, and certainly can't be all things to all people, but I will continue to try each and every day.
Well, I would invite viewers to go on the Marion City website and look at the September 28th council meeting, in which the mayor spent about 15 minutes learning about the intricacies of the ordinance affecting chickens and the way he dealt with a constituent. And I thought a very tactful and respectful way, but it made for a real kind of tangible sense of what mayors have to deal with. Mayor, look, let's talk for a second about the relationship between Marion and Carbondale.
Sure.
I mean, you've spent lots of time in Carbondale, obviously. Marion, we're only 15 miles or so apart. Do you see the communities as sort of friendly rivals or pieces of the same puzzle? How would you describe Carbondale and Marion?
Very much so the latter. I've got a terrific relationship with Mayor Henry and Steve Mitchell and Gary and their team. As a matter of fact, we invited them all and a few more city employees to come to our Chamber of Commerce meeting. This was pre-COVID. This was a year, or I guess this was just last January, boy, time flies. And then they invited us to come over to the Carbondale Chamber meeting, which we did, and I enjoyed, and I think they enjoyed being at ours. Very much view it as we're on the same team. I'm sure there's always going to be some situation where we're competing for something of limited availability, and so we'll have to compete. But I'm an abundance thinker. I think there's plenty for everybody out there, and put simply, I think we can accomplish a whole lot more working together than apart. And how that has manifested itself through this relationship, we've decided amongst several different projects to work on that. The one thing we really wanted to try to do was get air service from Chicago to Williamson County, and we're working on that as we speak, actually, with some very good results thus far. The Williamson County Airport had an opportunity through the Essential Air Service Program, which is a federally funded program, to either stay with Cape Air, which is service to St. Louis and now Nashville, which has always been a very good service provider, and I certainly understand why they wanted to stick with them. But those are obviously shorter hops and on prop planes of limited size. And one of the proposals they had at the time, which I was very supportive of because I really think there's a lot of potential for this, not just tourism, but business and lots of other tangents, was SkyWest, which is a United carrier, has a 50-seat jet that is a 49-minute flight, wheels up to wheels down from O'Hare to Marion for $89 one way. And I think that holds enormous potential for Southern Illinois as a whole to connect literally what some would call the two Illinois. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you not a funny story, but 2 weeks ago, I think this Friday, I had the opportunity to introduce Governor Pritzker. He was talking about the census here at Mantracon in Marion, and I asked for a few moments along with Senator Fowler and Dave Severin, our state representative, afterwards, and I really thought I was going to get 60 seconds. He ended up giving me about 20 minutes, and I made this pitch saying we need his help. Carbondale and Marion need his help. And man, has he really worked hard on this since that meeting. But one of the things, almost a faux pas, is I mentioned this thing about, the two Illinois, and I could tell it kind of offended him, and he said, well, I don't like using terms like that because it's divisive, and I said, Governor, I agree, and on its face it sounds, but what I'm talking about is connecting both ends of Illinois. I'm not talking about dividing. It's the very thing I'm proposing. And I think he sees that in the economic opportunity. It'll cost about $1.6 million a year to get that service in place, but Carbondale and their leadership and Marion and its leadership are determined to do everything that we can. And obviously the governor, like I said, is working very, very hard, and I give him a lot of kudos for that. And so back to the core question, Marion and Carbondale are on the same page and committed to working with one another. I know there's been some animosity, whether that was contrived or joking or tongue-in-cheek, that actually turned into real animosity. I don't know, but the players have changed. It's a new day. What's in Marion's best interest is certainly in Carbondale's best interest, and vice versa. Like I alluded at the very beginning, SIU is intrinsically important to the entire region, and we all need to be supporting Carbondale and SIU to our greatest extent. And Carbondale leadership knows that, and I'm confident they would tell you the same thing, that we're on the same page and working together. And I'm pleased with that and proud of
There was a profile of you in the Southern a year or so ago, and they asked you to describe some personal qualities, and you used the word intensity.
Yeah.
How is it manifested? Obviously, your demeanor is very approachable and relaxed. I mean, is that sort of just the veneer of what's going on, or?
I wouldn't say it's veneer. Necessarily. My wife says that I've got this very fine line between obsession and persistence. So I say I'm persistent. She says I'm obsessive. I will admit that OCD really should be called CDO because that's in alphabetical order. But I guess I, like a lot of other people, if I see something and I believe in it and I think it's the right thing to do and it's the right thing for Marion or it's the right thing for my business or whatever, I'd like to think that I don't let go of it. I don't blow in the wind and change my mind and chase the next shiny object or squirrel that comes along. I want to get the job done and then move on to the next thing, or have two or three, even better. I like to have two or three things like that I'm working on. But my wife says I'm obsessive with that. Is I just will not let it go. I don't like to take no for an answer. And if I think it's a good idea, then I'm going to fight for it until there's no fight left, I guess. So I don't know. I guess that could be a bad trait or that could be a good trait. That people that work with me, I think, with veneer or not, would tell you I'm pretty intense to work with.
Well, but I understand you like to relax by playing the trumpet. Is that a lifelong avocation, or?
Yes, I have played since I was 7 years old. I found a cornet that was my cousin's in my grandma's closet, and taught myself how to play a few little notes, and then have never stopped. I love playing that. Up until just a couple of years ago, retired professor from SIU, Bob Allison, who was a trumpet professor at SIU. I still took lessons from him. And my big problem right now, as it is for every musician, is there's just very few opportunities to go out there and play. So for no other reason that I look forward to COVID being over, I look forward to that because I like going out places and play that trumpet. So.
Great. Well, final question, Mr. Mayor. I mean, what sort of legacy do you want to leave, Marion? Obviously, your predecessor was there 55 years. That may be
I won't make it that long. I started too late.
But how do you want the Absher era to be remembered?
I don't necessarily want it to be remembered as the Absher era at all. But what I hope is taken away is that hard work pays off, vision pays off. Persistence or obsession or whatever you want to call it pays off. Don't give up till the fight is done. And that it's honorable to serve in government. We should be upholding that as something for people to do, not some, I don't know. I can't imagine, except maybe being a police officer in this country right now. Politicians are just derided. They're just looked at as the low of the low. It does not have to be that way. It should not be that way. I hope I'm considered in this group, and if I'm not, that's okay. But there are good people out there, plenty of them, much better and more qualified than I am, by the way. But there are lots of people that can fill these roles in government in an ingenuitive, new, enthusiastic, energetic way. We need to give some people a break and give them the benefit of the doubt, because the reasons that people don't run and don't want to involve their families and stuff like this is because of all the pettiness. And that's just exacerbated everywhere in our country right now. And it's very sad. It makes me sad. I need to be a more informed person, but I'll be honest with you, I can barely watch any of the news. It brings me down. It tears our country down. And if any other legacy, if there's nothing else left, is that I hope somebody says, you know what, he didn't have to do that, but he did, and he did it well. So, and that, I hope that provides an example that other people can do that too. Because honestly, that's what we're going to have at all levels of government in order to move past not only our current problems, but to get our country where we want and should be. And so, maybe over however long I'm in office, I hope to talk to people about how much I love doing this, how much it really is a very, very worthwhile thing to seek out and to do, and that you can be proud of it. And so maybe that's the legacy I hope to leave more than anything else.
Great. Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to staying in touch and following your work in Marion. And if you're in Carbondale, swing by the Institute. We'd love to meet with you in person.
Terrific.
Great.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and the invitation. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And thanks to all you for joining another edition of our Meet the Mayor series. You can see another version of this interview on YouTube later today or tomorrow. So please look at that and pass it on to your friends and join us again and keep the legacy of Paul Simon alive and well. Thank you.